So this is a great time to segue into looking at that verdict form, specifically because Philip was just talking about those predicate charges. So let's bring it up now. I believe that we have it. And let's start with number one, which is debatably right now the most important one that we have. This is racketeering conspiracy. Okay, so right at the top, how do you find the defendant? Not guilty or guilty? This is the question mark right now, because according to the juror note, some think guilty, some think not guilty. That's kind of the split that is happening right now. And this is to the predicate acts that Philip was just talking about there. If and only if you find the defendant guilty of count one, which types of racketeering acts do you unanimously find were involved in the offense? So acts involving kidnapping, which of course would involve Capricorn Clark on the instance when the jewelry went missing and she was allegedly taken to do that lie detector test. Or for instance, when she says she was taken and kidnapped, involved in the Kid Cudi arson, the Porsche blowing up. Is this proven or not proven? Or rather, it reads not proved, proved. Acts involving arson. Of course, we're talking about Kid Cudi and the Porsche. Proved, not proved. Acts involving bribery. We're of course talking about Eddie Garcia, the Intercontinental video. He testified on the stand talking about $100,000, the cash machine going through and it being counted. Was this bribery? Not proved or proved. Acts involving witness tampering. Not proved, proved. Acts involving forced labor. Not proved, proved. A lot of this is going to, majority of the testimony that we've heard throughout all of this, Mia potentially, getting working and not getting paid overtime, but the forced labor also goes to Cassie or Jane. Acts involving sex trafficking. Once again, going to Cassie and Jane. Was this not proved or proved? Acts involving transportation for purposes of prostitution. Not proved, proved. Acts involving drug distribution. Now, if and only if you find the defendant guilty of count one, did the pattern of racketeering activity include sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura? No or yes? This is the most important one at this time, everyone, because this is the one that the jury may be deadlocked on, cannot agree. After this, it reads, if and only if you find the defendant guilty of one count, did the pattern of racketeering activity include sex trafficking of Jane? No or yes? So, count one right there, heavy. There's a lot to break down, a lot of those predicate crimes, and this is the question mark, everyone watching. This is the one where the jurors are seemingly deadlocked at this time. Now on to count two. We're still in the deliberation forms, which, by the way, the rest, there have been a verdict. Unclear what the verdict is. Count two is sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. How do you find the defendant? Not guilty or guilty? Pretty straightforward there. The same with count three. The Mann Act, transportation, Cassandra Ventura. How do you find the defendant? Not guilty or guilty? Count four. Now we're moving on to Jane. This is sex trafficking of Jane. How do you find the defendant? Not guilty, guilty? Count five. Mann Act, transportation, Jane. How do you find the defendant? Not guilty or guilty? And once again, all roads lead back to racketeering conspiracy, because not only is that the one that is perhaps the most difficult to understand, the most complicated, especially when we're going through all of those different predicate crimes, the ones that I just mentioned. We're talking kidnapping, arson, bribery, witness tampering, forced labor, sex trafficking, transportation for purposes of prostitution, and drug distribution. It's the most complicated and the one that people seem to not be able to agree on as far as the jury. I gotta toss it back to our guests once again. Adante Pointer, what are you thinking now that I went through and read through each of those predicate crimes? Have your thoughts changed at all?
No, not at all. I think it just underscores and proves up what we've all been saying, which is that particular charge has so many subparts, so many different things that a jury would have to answer and agree on, that it's very easy for just a jury to not reach a unanimous decision that's convinced or that's supported by everyone agreeing about any one of those many different subparts. So it's not surprising. I think many of us saw that coming. Now, the other remaining charges, those are much more straightforward. And we saw that the jury, when they had questions, they sent those questions out about definitions and things. And the judge simply directed them back to those jury instructions. So I think that's why you're going to see that there was a unanimous verdict on those other charges, but they weren't able to agree with one on the RICO Act because there's just so many subparts, and it's hard to get many people to agree on what you want to go for dinner or you want to eat for dinner, much less 9 different subparts to make up one charge.
I mean, we went through all of them. We've been talking about them here on Law and Crime for forever, since before a jury was even seated, and it's never really gotten easier, right? I mean, the more I talk about it, the more I personally understand it, but I also have a leg up on the jury, the fact that I can discuss it with my peers, and they've only had about 13 hours of deliberation, which, by the way, we have paused the verdict watch clock at 13 hours and 11 minutes because it seems overall we have overall we have a verdict. On the first one, I'm going to go back to you, Philip Dubé, about all of this because you so astutely broke down all of those predicate crimes. What are your thoughts now that I went back and read through all of them? That seems to be the one that's tripping people up. So what do you think the judge is going to do?
You, and I don't know if Adante agrees. I think the judge may have done the defense a favor. I truly believe that he gave them a mispronouncement or a misstatement of law. I do not believe that the jury has to find each predicate unanimously. So what he did, if I'm correct, and I may be wrong, but Dante, chime in on this if I'm incorrect. I can handle it, believe me. My feelings won't be hurt. In other words, I think the judge expanded the burden of proof for the prosecution to prove each predicate beyond a reasonable doubt. That means all 12 jurors must unanimously agree and find beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed at least 2 or more of the predicates within a 10-year period. My reading of RICO, at least under the California version, is that all you really have to find beyond a reasonable doubt is that there was a pattern of enumerated crimes, but you don't have to be specific about the crime itself. So if that's the case and the jury is tripped up, good for Sean Diddy, because it sounds like this jury will never, ever reach a unanimous verdict, at least as to 2 or more of the predicates.
Okay, so I'm going to throw that to you, Adante, and ask if you agree with what Philip is saying about all of that. Judge Arun Subramanian says, okay, it needs to be unanimous as far as deciding on these predicate crimes. What are your thoughts about all of that?
Well, frankly, when I think about that, and when you were showing us the jury verdict form, I was in my mind, I'm thinking, look, you have this is one of the most high profile, if not the most high profile trial taking place right now. Those jury verdict forms are debated, they're reviewed, not only by the attorneys you see in the court, but by other attorneys who are assisting on the case back in the office, be it on the defense side or the prosecution side. And I've been in that situation, and everybody can still get it wrong in terms of the way it's enumerated and or the way the jury instructions are provided. My understanding is that they do need to come to a unanimous decision as relates to at least one of those subparts in order to support the RICO charge. But we're all going to find out, because no matter what happens here, best believe you're going to see this wind up in the appellate court.
Oh, I know that Diddy's team is definitely keeping an eye on everything as far as appeals if it doesn't go his way. I tend to agree with you exactly what you're saying, Adante, about all of this, that they definitely going to be ready with all of that. Now, we do have a viewer question asking, this is from Lee Now, who's asking, if it is guilty, will he still go to jail for counts 2 through 5, right? So, Philip, about that, if he's guilty, and the first one, let's take the racketeering conspiracy and just, step it out for a minute. But if we're talking 2 through 5, let's say he's guilty, which, by the way, we still have yet to know. He's guilty, he'll still go to jail for those, right?
Yes, of course. They're certainly not going to release him because he would stand convicted of those charges. And the only real question then is how much time he'll get. So, no, he's not going to get released. But you can bet, depending on what the split is on count 1, if in fact a mistrial is declared, the prosecution will likely retry him because, if I'm not mistaken, I think it carries life. And they definitely want to get him on that top count if they can get a life sentence.
A lot to think about here. I again want to remind anyone who is just tuned in that we have reached a verdict. The jury has reached a verdict in counts 2 through 5, it's that number 1, the racketeering conspiracy, that is still the question mark at this time. Now, we do have some questions. Where's Jesse? Where's Elizabeth? And let me answer them both right now, because this is a really intense time. Elizabeth Milner is in the courthouse behind me. She is there in the courtroom so she can make sure to get the latest updates, be there to see how Diddy reacts to anything and everything like that. I promise you we'll have Elizabeth Milner on as soon as we can, but it's important for her to be in that courthouse. I'm going to continue to stay here live in the Southern District of New York to bring you the latest, but also we've got Jesse Weber, who will be live from the studio. We're going to be with you until we find out an answer for all of this. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Jesse Weber will be here to break it all down for us, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
There is no verdict, as you see there, on count 1. That is the racketeering charge. We are waiting to see exactly what the judge decides, if they want to read out that partial verdict, or if they do want to, wait for count 1. However, we are hearing from Fox News that they might actually be reading out that partial verdict here any moment. Again, a lot of information here is just coming in, so we're checking in with our Fox 5 New York team as well as Fox News. Let's lift the audio back up, as it looks like they are finished with the person who was screaming there in the background.
And just like with Weinstein, the defense has said that the women who were the alleged victims stayed in contact with them. They were not children. They were not except for at least one, they were not young, they were adults, they were full-on adults, but they still made the decision to stick with him. And how that weighs on the jury's decision, we look at it, 8 men, 4 women, most of the women, professional or careers. How will they view the fact that these women stayed in that orbit? That's a key here, we think.
All right, Arthur, thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up there for you now, and keep it right here because we'll give you updates as soon as they become available.
All right.
All right, so again, we are getting this information here coming in, if you are just joining us, as we did learn that the jury has reached a partial verdict in the Diddy sex trafficking trial that we have been covering here for about 8 weeks. There was 7 weeks of testimony, and today was just day 2 of jury deliberations, not even a complete day just yet. They have reached a verdict, we're told, on counts 2 through 5. However, count 1, they have not been able to come to an agreement, as we are told that the jurors do have strong opinions on each side of that argument. Now, we are told, Fox News is reporting here, that the partial verdict could be read any moment now. However, all of that is unclear because all of it is developing at this hour. But we know that the jury has reached a partial verdict. They are still working to get a verdict on that racketeering charge. If we do get any more information coming in from Fox News or Fox 5 New York, we are going to make sure to bring that to you right here on Live Now from Fox. But once again, taking a live look outside of the courthouse here in New York as all of this is developing. My name is
He
Josh
has 3
Fresno,
options, and I'll just go over them for you. The jury
my
can
colleague
keep.
Andy Mack does have Nima Rahmani, a friend of the show, who is standing by with him to help with this. I'm going to turn down the audio here for just a second, and they will pick up the stream in, I would say, a matter of seconds with all of that information. You're watching Live Now from Fox. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. You're looking live there in New York City as we're continuing to follow this bombshell news that the jury has reached at least a partial verdict in this Sean Diddy Combs trial there in the heart of New York City. As we're learning the latest, thanks to my colleague Josh Breslow for guiding us the last several hours. We're still trying to grapple with what exactly this means, as those 5 charges the music mogul faces include RICO, racketeering, also sex trafficking. So you can see just a couple live shots right now outside of the courtroom. We'll see if anyone talks about this as it comes here just past now 5 o'clock on the East Coast. Let's continue on to dissect some of these, because as we know, 2, 3, 4, and 5 reportedly the jury reaching a verdict on this, and the defense
sitting down with Barbara Walters.
I know you don't want to talk about guys, and I won't push it, but how are you going to find anybody?
No one ever got out totally unscathed.
Charge. So we're following it here on Live Now from Fox. I'm going to take you right now out to our Fox 5 team there in New York that's diving into the latest.
In this case. Let's get right to Fox 5's Lisa Evers outside the courthouse following the developments. Lisa, we're hearing that the defense is fighting to keep the jury in deliberations right now, not taking a partial verdict. There's no verdict on count 1, which is the most serious charge of racketeering conspiracy. What are you hearing?
Well, right now it appears that both the prosecution and the defense are fighting to keep that jury to continue deliberating. But let's roll it back just a few minutes, like just a half an hour or so ago. We saw Diddy's family, that some of the kids running towards the side, the court entrance to go back into the entrance. The jury was told the court that they could not reach agreement on count 1. That's the first charge. That is the charge of RICO. That's the racketeering charge, which all the legal experts that we've been talking to here on Fox 5 these past weeks and actually a couple months have said that will be the most difficult. It's also the most significant, because that's the one that could send him away for many, many decades. Now, they did say they reached agreement. The jury claimed that they reached agreement. They reached a verdict on the second charge, which is 2 counts of the sex trafficking charge and 2 counts of the transportation for prostitution, which is the third charge. So they've reached agreement on everything except that RICO charge. We don't know what their verdict is on those charges yet, but now both the prosecution and defense, everybody's back in the courtroom right now, which of course we can't be in and we're not allowed to be live in, obviously. But they want both sides, it appears from the latest reporting that we're able to get, both sides apparently want those, they want them to go back and continue deliberating. So we've heard about these partial verdicts, most recently in a state case with the Weinstein verdict. But let's go right now to criminal defense attorney Seth J. Zuckerman. He's joining us here at our pop-up studio across the street from federal court. And Seth, you just came from the DA's office. You're running around. And when you heard about this in a federal case, that the jury's saying, okay, on day 2 they have a partial verdict, what do you think about that?
Well, Lisa, they had gone hours today without any notes, without anything coming from the jury. And then to hear that they had a partial verdict was a little surprising to me. The judge obviously wanted the input of both parties to decide, well, what do we do next? The racketeering count, RICO count 1 is obviously, as you said, the most serious count that he's facing, but also the hardest for the government to prove in this case. The verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 is not surprising at an earlier phase. And what we're waiting to hear right now is whether or not the judge is going to give the Allen charge, which is a charge you give to a jury when they tell you initially that they can't reach a verdict, and the judge tells them you need to go back and try a little harder. You need to try and persuade your fellow jurors. Now, what I'm hearing is that there were multiple jurors on each side who said that they couldn't be persuaded one way or another, but still it's incumbent upon the judge at this point to give an Allen charge at an appropriate time to encourage the jurors to go back and deliberate more. But what's unclear is whether or not the judge has done that already. What I do know is that he has not taken a partial verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, so we don't know yet what the verdict is on those counts.
So have you ever heard of a partial verdict in a federal case like this?
Oh, yes. Partial verdicts happen all the time. It's incumbent upon the judge, however, not to take the partial verdict immediately and to let the jury complete their deliberations. If at the end of the day the jury is hung and they can't come to a verdict on count 1, they'll take a partial verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. But it happens fairly regularly where they come to a partial verdict and then they get hung on other counts. counts, and then it's up to the prosecution as to whether or not they want to retry that count.
But then does it happen this early on in the deliberations? I mean, we're only at day 2. Yesterday, it seemed like the jury was having trouble even with the instructions. This morning, things seem to be moving along pretty quickly. Then kind of nothing this afternoon. You know, they were getting transcripts and that type of thing going for it. But is it uncommon to have that happen just like on day 2 of deliberations?
Lisa, it's really hard to predict what a jury's doing in the back. As a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, I've sat there for hours and days trying to figure out what a jury's doing back there, and it's impossible to figure out at all times. So is it surprising? No. We obviously don't know the discussions that were going on back there. This is obviously only the second day of deliberations. Yesterday, the jury asked to leave early. That, to me, was a sign that they weren't close to any verdict. Because if they were close to a verdict, they probably would have wanted to stay. But today, they got a full day in. They were deliberating for a number of hours without any interruptions because they had limited notes. And clearly, they reached a partial verdict and decided that they couldn't be persuaded on count 1.
So when they say the terminology, and help us with the terminology so we understand this clearly, when they say they can't be persuaded, is this the same thing as a hung jury, or we just don't know? Like they feel like they've just hit a wall and can't go beyond it?
It's foreshadowing a hung jury. So it's not the judge isn't allowing them to be declared a hung jury quite yet, but this is the first step in a later hung jury. So the judge is giving them more time, encouraging them to go back and try to persuade one another, because like you said, they haven't had that much time back there together. So this is the first step, and if they come back and say, Judge, we really just can't reach a verdict on this count, he has to make a determination along with the parties as what do we do next. He probably will ask them to go back for a number of hours, likely tomorrow, if they say that they can't be persuaded this evening, and then take a verdict probably by the end of the day tomorrow if they say they can't be persuaded, or depending on what the notes say.
Okay, if you're just joining us now, we have breaking news here at the federal court in the RICO sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The jury late this afternoon sending a note to the court that they had reached a verdict on counts 2 through 5, which is the 2 counts of sex trafficking and 2 counts of transportation for prostitution across state lines, and that they could not reach any agreement on the RICO count. The judge we're talking about what the judge's options are right now. Both the prosecution and defense indication has been that they want the jury to go back and continue deliberating because it's only day 2. Yesterday we heard that they were having trouble with instructions. This morning they made more requests, and then this afternoon this bombshell announcement that they had reached a verdict that quickly on 2 of the 3 major charges, which contained 4 of the 5 counts that Combs was facing. So that's what's happening here. We're talking about what the possible pathways forward. Seth, let's talk about that. So if you do get a hung jury, can you have a hung jury on one of the charges?
Absolutely. So there can be a hung jury on count 1 and then take a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then it's up to the government as to what they want to do with that charge, or whether or not they want to retry it or not retry Mr. Combs on that count. But that's absolutely possible that they could have a hung jury on 1 count and have a verdict on the other 4 counts. And as you know, we still don't know the verdict on those 4 counts.
Right, exactly.
They could be split on those counts as well. It's probably unlikely at this point, the fact that they came to a verdict at the same time on all 4 of those counts. It's probably the same verdict on each of those 4 counts. But as I said before, with a jury, you just never know.
We really don't know. And then in terms of how long they can go, if the jury says, if the judge says, we want you to go back and continue deliberating, then can they continue deliberating? He told them they could if they want to, past 4 or 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and they could deliberate for another few days. It depends on the notes that they send to the judge. The judge at this point told them to go back and deliberate further, and that I'm not taking a partial verdict at this point. But they could go back and they could deliberate for a day, 2 days, 3 days after you receive an instruction from the judge. It depends on what notes the jury sends to the judge at this point. They could send a note first thing tomorrow morning saying, we're never going to reach a verdict on this, and then the judge has to decide. But if he doesn't hear back from the jury any further tomorrow or the following day, well, that could also change things.
All right, and obviously the crowd is building outside the courtroom because there's a lot of buzz about this, and there have been a lot of people that are following this case very, very closely. Do you think at this point that the jury they've gone through nearly 2 months of testimony, that they kind of already walked into those deliberations with some idea of what they would find, or is that just too much supposition for us to make?
No, I think that's fair. I've spoken to a lot of jurors over my time, in trying cases. And yeah, they generally have an inclination when they walk into the jury room. They do deliberate fairly, but they probably had an idea when they walked back there, and they had a fair discussion with each other about the evidence or lack thereof on the counts. And as all of the legal commentators had predicted, count one was always the most challenging for the government. I'm not surprised that there are jurors who have dug their heels in each direction on count one. It was always a very aggressive charge by the government, and so I'm not surprised to hear that the jurors are having a hard time with that count.
All right, let's check in with our anchors. Bianca, Natasha, any questions from you guys?
Yeah, Lisa, without that RICO charge, how serious are the other charges, and what kind of prison time would Diddy be facing if convicted on charges 2 through 5?
Okay, I'm going to pass that on to Seth right now. So, Seth, Natasha's asking the RICO charges, aside from that, the sex trafficking, 2 counts of that, 2 counts of the transportation for prostitution. What kind of sentences would those carry if he's found guilty of those?
Well, so it's a lesser sentence than the RICO charge, but they still face heavy guidelines. Now, obviously, it's up to the judge at the end of the day, and I'm sure a sentencing would be hard fought, but I don't think we're there yet, right? We don't even have a verdict quite yet.
Right.
There's a partial verdict, and we don't know what that verdict is. But, you know, like I said, the sentence on those charges are less than the RICO charge.
Which could be decades.
Which could be decades. But I'm sure Mr. Combs still faces a very substantial sentence by the judge under the sentencing guidelines on those counts.
All right, Seth J. Zuckerman, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it and helping us with it. We're reporting live from federal court here where the jury sent a note saying that they had reached a partial verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs RICO sex trafficking case. We're not quite sure what's been happening the last couple of minutes because we've been out here trying to get the word out, but we'll find out and we'll get back to you with more as this story develops. But I'm going to send it back to the studio to Bianca and Natasha right now. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much for that. As Lisa Evers on the ground outside of this courthouse right now as they're continuing to learn what this exactly means. We do have multiple angles of this scene there as a partial verdict has been reached. Let's bring to the conversation right now, friend of the program, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, thank you so much for joining us. We do know that the note was passed to the judge that they have a verdict on count 2, 3, 4, and 5, not the RICO, the racketeering case. What do you make of what just happened?
Obviously big news, and generally news like this in a complex federal case that could go either way is bad news for the prosecution. Now let's go through the counts. Counts 3 and 5, those are prostitution. Those were always the most readily provable counts. So it's certainly possible that the jurors are not guilty across the board. I would be surprised if we got not guilties on the prostitution, because the defense's argument is that Combs didn't know that these were escorts and he was hiring porn stars to make a homemade porno. Not a particularly good argument, in my opinion. Now, that being said, if that's all the government gets, this will be a huge loss for the Department of Justice. This will go down as the most expensive prostitution trial in American history. So then you're looking at counts 2 and 4. Count 2 is sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Count 4 is sex trafficking of victim Jane. Those were the harder crimes to prove, in my opinion. So I would be surprised if the jurors were guilty on sex trafficking, but had hung on RICO or racketeering. It's certainly possible, but one of the major components of racketeering is a racketeering act. And we've talked about them. It could be drug trafficking, sex trafficking, can be extortion, can be obstruction, can be bribery, can be arson. But in many ways, because there's different paths to get there, racketeering is an easier charge to prove. So, you know, looking at the possibilities, not guilty across the board is certainly a possibility, although unlikely given the prostitution. Guilty across the board, possible. But again, if they've reached a guilty verdict on sex trafficking and prostitution, they're probably well on their way to guilty on racketeering as well. So what we may be seeing right now, Andy, is a split verdict, not just a partial verdict, a split verdict where we have guilty on the least serious charges, counts 3 and 5, prostitution, also called the Mann Act. We have not guilty on sex trafficking, counts 2 and 4, in which case this entire trial is going to come down to racketeering. Either the jurors will get it together and they'll reach a verdict, in which case it'll completely make or break this trial. If the government gets racketeering and prostitution, I think they'll consider that a win. Combs will likely get double-digit years in federal prison. If they get not guilty on racketeering and sex trafficking and just prostitution, we're looking at little to no time, maybe even time served. So that top count is going to be everything. The judge read an instruction, told them to continue deliberating. Hasn't read that Allen charge yet. We know what that is. But I think we'll see today and potentially tomorrow. It's going to decide Combs' future.
Yeah, that is a very good way to explain it, because the RICO, the top charge in this, is so very important. And you kind of dissected the partial jury verdict. We'll see if it is that split verdict, as you mentioned. Let's get into the Allen charge, because the prosecution pushing for this, to trying to find a consensus. How often does that happen in a courtroom?
It's very common. Before a judge instructs a jury and discharges them, they give one last effort. And this is a famous Supreme Court case, aptly called Allen. And there's an instruction that, tells jurors of their duty to deliberate, to keep an open mind, to listen to their fellow jurors, hoping that continued deliberations will reach a verdict. Because if the jury mistrials on count one, then potentially the government can go through this whole process all over and just charge Combs with racketeering. And obviously, that's not going to be a good use of anyone's time. If the jurors, with a few more hours or even a day or two, can get a verdict on that top count, that's going to be in everyone's best interest. But of course, the defense prefers a mistrial and not guilty on sex trafficking, hoping the government won't retry this case.
And I want to ask you, because if they push them back to deliberate more, and no matter how long that goes, if it's just a few hours, a few days, can they talk about the other charges? Or those now counts 2, 3, 4,
on episodes
5,
of Ellen or on red carpets? He's someone who has had his hands deeply on the pulse of music for the last several decades.
Absolutely. The fact of the matter is that Sean Combs is a cultural icon. He really kind of defined in a lot of ways what Black excellence is. He really was able to walk people into rooms, walk a generation, the hip hop generation, into rooms that we never thought we would see the hip hop generation be able to walk into. We all of a sudden were invited to sit, Fashion Row front week, or Fashion Row week front row, partying with Anna Wintour, going to the Met Gala, walking into Forbes 500, Fortune 500 companies and getting deals that we didn't imagine people in hip hop would ever be able to get. And a lot of that happened because of Sean Combs and his influence. So, to dismiss the fact that he is a cultural icon and a beacon for this community and has done so much for this community is impossible. But you now have to look at it, right next to kind of what we all have experienced and been covering this summer with regards to this trial.
All right, Kelly, Rena, and Bernarda, much thanks to you all. We're going to take a quick break and much more coverage on the other side.
I'd never seen that many skeletal remains, thousands.
This killer, he's the Dahmer you've never heard of.
There were mannequins, almost like it was a club.
I felt the presence of evil.
Never before a face-to-face interview with a camera.
Why now?
Let me ask you, am I the evil culprit, the accomplice?
I'd like to know how the audience views me.
The Fox Hollow Murders, Playground of a Serial Killer, only on Hulu.
At any point, you can encounter evil.
Some of the racketeering predicate acts, so things like the extortion, things like the drug distribution, the potential bribery for that hotel security video. So she's obviously the government's star witness, and she ties up a lot of the loose ends here, from prostitution to trafficking to racketeering. So maybe jurors wanted to hear her specific testimony with relation to either counts 2 through 4 or potentially that racketeering. They weren't very specific, so we're not going to necessarily know what they were looking for.
Yeah, you always want to kind of look into the jury room and see what they're kind of going through their minds. And I do want to get more, because we're getting some information piecemeal, piece by piece, coming out of this federal courtroom. And of course, Fox News is saying the defense wants to ask at the end of the day tomorrow rather than now, if they would want to stay over for the third day. The defense does not want the jury to feel rushed or stressed, so we could be in a position similar tomorrow. What do we make of that, and kind of what are the arguments for both prosecution and defense there?
Well, Andy, never underestimate the power of a 3-day weekend to get 12 strangers to return a verdict.
A holiday weekend, nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously Friday is the 4th of July. Courts are closed. And if the jurors do need to continue deliberating, they have to come back next week. So the last thing the defense wants here is jurors to feel pressured. We don't know what the split is on count 1. The jurors obviously didn't say that. Is it 1 or 2 holdouts? Can they be proverbially beaten into submission in that jury deliberation room? I mean, we saw in the Harvey Weinstein case where, tempers can flare. There was even a potential physical altercation in that case. If anyone's served as a juror, it can be very frustrating. So obviously, the defense doesn't want anyone to feel that pressure of either time or a weekend or a holiday. They want the jurors to feel comfortable maintaining that position.
He also said they can decide if they want to do that this evening or return to resume tomorrow in the morning. And for more on this, I want to bring in ABC News legal contributor and trial attorney Brian Buckmeyer, who has been following this along with us. And Brian, up something called an Allen charge, which, and I'm going to attempt to put my legal hat on here, but that is essentially a jury rendering a partial verdict here that the judge could potentially accept.
Well, Alex, like I say, you didn't pass the bar, but you know a little bit, and you do know a lot. Yes, an Allen charge comes from the Supreme Court case where if a jury has got to a point like we have here, where they say they're at an impasse, they feel for whatever reason that there cannot be a meeting of the mind of the 12 people, that they cannot go forward. And initially what will happen is a judge will read either the standard language of an Allen charge, and you can Google it, and you can probably find it for the SCNY or any kind of federal court, or they would kind of modify the language, making it shorter or longer, or emphasizing more aspects of it, depending on what the sides agree to. And basically what you're telling the jury is, it's your job to keep pushing forward. It's difficult, and we understand you may have different opinions, but lean on each other, talk to each other, try to converse, and see if there's other facts or arguments or suggestions where you can all come to consensus, whatever that consensus is. And in an Allen charge, you cannot feel like you are moving the needle in one way or the other. It has to be absolutely neutral. It cannot be suggesting that you must convict or that you must acquit, and that's what's going to happen. But this last message to the jury by the judge, I think, is going to be more telling than anything else. Because right now, it's 5:20 p.m. The judge has always instructed them that they can come back the next day. Tomorrow is Wednesday. It's still well within the game to come back and deliberate. Friday is July 4th. That's a day off. Thursday, they were told they're going to be off as well. And so if the jury says we are willing to stay, that would be a strong indication that they're close to a verdict, and we might get one today. If they say that they have to come back tomorrow, that would be a strong indication that the opinions of people are so strong, they're hoping that they can maybe sleep on it and come back tomorrow and start again. What we hear next from the jury will be very telling.
Well, and Brian, because this situation is developing literally as we speak, we just heard that the judge sent the jury back to the deliberation room. He gave them the option to either resume deliberations today or to adjourn and return in the morning. Said that he instructed them to send back a note whenever they came to a decision. They have come to a decision. They are adjourning for the day. They will be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. to resume those deliberations. But I want to get back to these counts. We've got 5 counts here, the most severe of which is that racketeering conspiracy, which carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. But counts 2 and 3 are also quite severe, and count 2 does also have that maximum sentence of life in prison as well.
Yeah, it's not just, I know oftentimes when we talk in the news, it's easier to talk about the max, but oftentimes the minimum is the most harsh, because for those sex trafficking allegations of sex trafficking either Cassie or Jane, there's a minimum of 15 years. And I think that's very important when you're talking about anyone, but especially when you're talking about a 55-year-old, because you're talking about if Sean Combs is found guilty of even just sex trafficking Cassie, at best, he's not going to be able to get out until he is 70 years old. Now, when it comes to the feds, you often do 85% of your sentence for every year you spend in jail. You get good time, meaning that time cut off that sentence of 54 days. But 15 years is a lot, but life is life.
All right, thank you, Brian. We're going to take a quick break here. Much more breaking news on the other side.
15-year life sentence, and also that fifth count, the transportation to engage in prostitution. So those are the 5 counts that the jury was really tasked with finding a verdict on. They appear to have at least a verdict right now on 2 through 5. So not the most important one, not the most damaging one in terms of the racketeering, the RICO case. But we're still following this very closely. Live picture there outside of the courtroom as the judge telling the jury to keep deliberating in this case. He mentioned that the Allen charge, the really genesis behind this, to ask them to try to find at least a consensus one way or another. And that is also at the center of this. The jury has apparently found a verdict, at least a partial verdict. We don't know which way it goes. You heard there from Nima Romani, friend of the program, former federal prosecutor, that it could be necessarily split in terms of several of these counts. They found not guilty, several of them finding guilty. The most important one, though, count number 1. So we're just going to watch this here. Let's just pull up the audio a little bit and listen into what's going on, because as you imagine, as this news is filtering through social media and the airwaves, people are heading down to this courtroom to see a verdict in person. Let's just listen in briefly here to some of the moments on the ground in the Big Apple. All right, you're just listening into this here on Live Now from Fox. The jury reaching this partial verdict in this Diddy trial. And although a verdict has been reached on counts 2 through 5, deliberations will resume once more on Wednesday. And we will not know exactly what that verdict was, if it was all encompassing, all guilty, not guilty, or a split verdict in terms of those 2, 3, 4, 5 charges as they are going home for the day. The jury is. They will continue tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. So that is a major development in terms of this case. And like you heard there from Nima Romani, they will go back in the jury room and they will continue to deliberate. And counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 still very much on the table in terms of deliberation. They will simply present one jury form, one verdict form to the judge. So those counts still very much up in the air, not solidified, guilty or not guilty, depending on what we're looking at. All right, let's just continue to listen in here. A rainy day, but we'll see if we have anybody stepping out of the courtroom to make some comments. Let's just listen in here to this scene on Live Now.
Refresh, their social media accounts and refresh whatever news sites they were looking at to call any information about this because of that. They wanted to hear people like Kid Cudi testify and finally say something for the first time after reading about what allegedly happened in that initial Cassie lawsuit.
And reading about also seeing the pictures of that Porsche 911. Kelly Carter, thank you so much. We're going to take another quick break. Much more breaking news coverage on the other side.
Wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed.
Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, and